This is Back to Back.
Yo, what's up, back-to-backers? This is Willy Joy. Welcome to the show. This is Back to Back. This is my podcast. How you doing? How we feeling out there? I'm out in Los Angeles right now. I'm not at home, and you know what that means. It's time to record another intro in a car. You know me, I just can't get enough of sitting in a car, talking into a microphone, looking like an idiot to anyone who sees me. I just can't stop doing it. And I just did an interview a couple days ago that left me feeling really inspired, and that's what we're here to do today. I've got Haywyre on the show. He's one of the best live performers in electronic music right now, and he's actually on tour with another incredible group, Koan Sound. They're going all over the country for the next month. I'm going to put a link in the description of this episode where you can go check out all those dates. And look, this isn't your typical DJ show. In fact, no DJs are involved. No DJs were harmed in the production of this tour. And Haywyre is really pushing the boundaries of what you can do with a live show for electronic music, for dance music. He's a virtuoso on the piano, on the keys. The show looks amazing visually. We actually recorded this podcast on a sound stage where he was rehearsing, so I got to see the full live setup. The whole thing was just nuts. And aside from the live aspect, Haywyre is just putting out some of my favorite music right now. He's in the process of releasing a 6 EP series. The whole project is called Panorama, and his newest single is called Never Count on Me. It's out right now. I'm obsessed with the song. I'm playing it in my SiriusXM show this week on Back to Back Radio. I'm going to put it in the Back to Bangers Spotify playlist for this show. Haywyre is crazy. If you're not familiar, do yourself a favor, go check him out, and I'll tell you more about our chat in just a minute. But first, let me tell you about today's sponsor. Back to Back is brought to you by my friends over at Serato. Where would the DJ game be without Serato? I don't know, but almost certainly somewhere worse. Serato has been making the top-of-the-line DJ software for years and years and years. I've used it the majority of my career, and now they've branched out to start working with producers as well. Their new software is called Serato Studio, and it is an awesome beat-making tool. Serato Studio isn't here to replace your main DAW. They're just here to simplify your workflow and really simplify the path to music production. Serato Studio is quick, it's easy to use, it's really good for when you just have an idea that pops into your head and you want to get it out really fast. You can lay everything out quickly in there, you can modify everything really easily. They've got cool functionality, you can change the whole key of what you're working on with a single click, and it comes built in with tons of loops, effects, sample packs. They've got these crazy celebrity sample packs. When it released, Just Blaze put one out, and just this week, actually, Flosstradamus dropped a sample pack for Serato Studio. There's so much good content out there for it. So definitely, all my producers out there, this is something you need to go check out. And if you do, right now, you can go to serato.com/studio to get a free 14-day trial of the software. So there's really no downside. You get to try out a new free tool, and who knows, you might just upgrade your whole workflow. So go check them out, the brand new Serato Studio at www.serato.com/studio. All right. So for this conversation with Haywyre, it was funny because he's a name that I've known. I've been aware of him for a really long time because both of our careers really started in the Midwest. He was living and coming up in Milwaukee at the same time that I was living and coming up in Chicago. And I talk about this a little in our chat. I would go to Milwaukee and play all the time, and I would see his name around. People would tell me about him, but we never connected back in the day. And now we've really come full circle. He's actually back living in Milwaukee, and we connected out here in Los Angeles. Like I said, he's on this crazy tour right now. We recorded this at his soundstage, his rehearsal space. His whole team was running around. It's a highly technical show, a lot of moving parts. And knowing where he started, because I was familiar with the scene in Milwaukee at the time and the level that everyone was at, it was just really cool to now come in and to see him at this really high level. And artistically, all the thought and care and conceptualizing that he puts into the project, I really wanted to drill into the path he's forging for himself right now. But we also got to talk about the good old days when he first started really blowing up. You know, he was living in Vancouver, interning with Monstercat, then releasing with Monstercat, touring with crazy big EDM acts. And so his whole career has had this crazy arc to it. And like I said, if he's coming through your town on this tour, do not miss it. It's probably my top recommendation for shows that people should be going to right now. It was a really enjoyable chat. I hope you guys enjoy it. If you do, and you want to support this show, if you want to help out so that I can keep making more and more of these conversations for you guys, don't forget to let people know you're listening. That really is the best way to help this show grow. You know, I say this every single week, but every time I get tagged in somebody's story, every time I see somebody tweeting that they're listening to the show, enjoying the show, I get stoked because I know that that means that our community, the community we've all built together over the last couple of years, is growing. It's getting stronger with each new episode, and it just makes me more excited to take bigger and bigger swings, to do more for this show, to make it better for everyone out there. And don't forget, I'm always here for you too. You can always hit me up on email at backtobackpod@gmail.com. You can send me questions. You can send me thoughts. You can send me rants, whatever you want. You know, sometimes I'll read people's emails on the air. So if you're looking for advice about music, if you're looking for advice about your love life, you can ask me, something I'm totally unqualified for. I'll pretend like I know the answer. It'll be good. And like I said, if you want to hit me up online, if you want to let people know you're listening, at Willy Joy or at Back to Back Pod. Those are my names on all social media. So much love to everybody out there. Much love to my guest this week. And let's get into that right now. This is me and Haywyre back to back. Let's go.
Oh, you already got it all set up?
Oh, yeah, baby.
Nice.
Professional operation over here. Yeah, that sounds great. This is actually a great room to record in.
Yeah, I think it's it looks like it's acoustically treated a bit.
Yeah, at least a little bit. They got the big pillows on the walls.
I don't know what that's about.
Yeah, I was actually just going to say.
Because normally you do if it was a studio, you'd do some diffusion as well, not just absorption, right?
Right.
So yeah, maybe, they just want it to be quiet in here, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, this room looks like maybe it used to be like a vocal booth or something. I don't know. Yeah,
that could be. That could definitely be.
Yeah, a little unclear. I mean, it's interesting just seeing you in this environment, in this like rehearsal studio, on a sound stage and all of that. Is that something that's familiar to you at this point, or is this a fairly new thing of like really setting up the performance and staging it?
It is fairly new to me. And I'm really enjoying it because in the past, having done a lot of direct support slots for other musicians, I'm doing festivals and one-off shows and that kind of stuff. It's a lot of fun to actually be able to properly prepare things. And I enjoy that because you get to take more control over the experience, and yeah, it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was thinking about this while I was driving over to you. I mean, now you're doing this big co-headline tour with Koan Sound, who are another sort of interesting live act that's maybe hard to categorize or draws from a lot of influences. Mm-hmm. When you first started, really performing a lot as Haywyre and really getting the name out there, did you find that people sort of had trouble categorizing you? Did you end up on like kind of weird bills or any of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Unless you are extremely consistent with your content, I think that's bound to happen. I mean, I've definitely been on bills that I've felt like I shouldn't have been on, and I've been on a lot of bills that I felt like I should have been on. But yeah, that's definitely happened before.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just curious about, like, I think early on, a project like yours, it can feel maybe frustrating where, you know, you're like, no, people aren't getting the idea, like, this isn't what this is, you know?
Sure, yeah.
Or I have different aims than sort of what people want to categorize this as.
Absolutely.
Was that like an early frustration, or did you kind of, I guess I'm curious, like, whether you felt like part of any particular scene at the start?
Sure. I mean, I think it's kind of, most artists are obviously evolving constantly anyways. And, you know, a good example of that, it just came to mind. I don't know if you're familiar with Noisia.
Oh, of course.
But they just announced, for example, that 2020 is the last year for them. Right? I think they said end of 2020.
End of 2020,
It's just an example that came to mind in terms of people evolve and they change, and that's just a natural part of life. And so for many artists, if you're using art as a tool of self-expression and isn't necessarily engineering a specific product or sound, then that's going to be reflected in what you're doing. So there's kind of like always that struggle.
Did you look at the project either back then or now as more of sort of a vessel for expression like that? Like, you not tied to necessarily one specific sound or style or scene?
Sure, absolutely. And I've always had a lot of fun you know, getting my feet wet with different sounds and with different tools and that kind of stuff. And I remember electronic music to me was really exciting when I first heard about it. And I just knew that I had to try to make something along the lines of, you know, what was inspiring me at the time. I think, well, Noisia was one of the first artists actually to,
that's interesting,
to kind of catch my attention. I remember their remix of, they had a remix of a Deadmau5 song that came out. I don't quite remember what it was.
Like what, in like the late 2000s, early like 2010s?
Yeah, like 2008, I think, or something. Yeah, there's artists like that, and Bass Nectar, and a few other random names like Flying Lotus that really kickstarted my interest in electronic music production.
And where were you, like, when you were really getting into being turned on to those sounds, where were you living? Because I know you've bounced around a little bit.
I was living at home in Shorewood or Milwaukee.
Right.
So that's where I live now. But yeah, like you said, I've kind of moved around a little bit.
I think I first heard about you when you were living in Milwaukee.
Really?
Because, well, I was living in Chicago at the time. And
cool.
For whatever reason, Milwaukee, like, I was just crushing it in Milwaukee.
Nice.
Like, I don't know why, and it was the first time in my career where I really noticed, you know, oh, there's a fan base, and like people are coming back when I come back to the town. For whatever reason, that was Milwaukee for me, and so I ended up playing there a lot over a couple years.
That's really cool.
It was great. Yeah, I still fond memories for sure. But I think that it was around the time when you were starting to really get out there, at least locally. Maybe more than locally.
What year approximately?
This is like,
or like range?
Again, like, yeah, late 2000s or early 2010s.
Okay. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, so I started releasing in 2009. So it would have been really surprising to me if you would have heard of me at that point.
Well, were you playing local shows with like Brew City Bass or like? Yep. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I would always play at the Miramar anytime I was there.
Right. I was going to ask if it was the Miramar because that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah. I couldn't remember if we had actually played a show together ever, like way back in the day. But I think it was just that either I saw your name on flyers or I couldn't remember.
That's cool.
It's cool you still live there. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Before that, I was living in Vancouver, and I moved there to work more closely with a label called Monstercat. And after living there for about 3 years and trying to refocus on working independently, I wanted to just kind of, I don't know, be around friends and family a little bit.
Back to the roots a little.
Yeah, and figure out what to do next, where to go next. And I like the idea of just being a bit nomadic for a while, and just traveling and connecting with people in different cities and different places, and seeing what appeals to me most.
Yeah, dude, I'm all about that. I've bounced around a lot, lived in a bunch of different cities. I've never lived in like the cities where it would probably make the most sense for me to live. Like I've never lived in LA. Have you ever had any of either from yourself or externally people being like, oh no, you need to move for your job?
Yeah, certainly. Less of that, I think, for my career than maybe some other people deal with, but I think now, for some reason, more so than ever, especially since I'm like working independently. I have and especially after having been home in Milwaukee for the last year and a half, where it has been a bit difficult to connect with other creatives, because it's a great city, but it's not necessarily like a hub for creativity necessarily.
Sure.
So I've definitely got my eyes on places that are more centralized creatively.
Where would you go?
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, funny enough, LA is on the list.
Sure, of course. I'm not shitting on LA. I like LA.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, it's. I think I've just always heard that LA and New York are very fast-paced, competitive, and I don't really enjoy writing music in those kind of pressured environments.
I'm the same, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've always kind of been apprehensive about considering those, but at the same time, if there are a lot of other people that I'd like to work with, that I like being around, and that inspire me, then maybe it's a sacrifice worth making, right?
Sure, absolutely. Well, it's interesting you say that, because when I think of your music, and I think probably a lot of people's first impression of you is that you do everything, you're the one-man band, you're playing every instrument, you're singing, the live show is you doing everything in front of people. Have you ever wanted to bring in outside forces, like work with other people, collaborate more? Or is your writing process, like, does it work because it's just this thing that's in you?
I think a lot of artists that I think tune into a certain standard of quality do that by controlling their tools and their environment and becoming very familiar and in tune with what the entire process from beginning to end is like.
Yeah.
And for me, that was always a big reason for working on my own. And at this point, though, I've realized that so many great opportunities and sometimes even friendships have passed me by because I've always been a bit too controlling sometimes of my process.
Right.
I'm definitely trying to get more comfortable with that. I think it would help me creatively and just like psychologically too, just be more comfortable with sharing and other people's ideas and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's funny. This sounds like a weird question, but are you an only child?
I'm not.
Okay.
I've got an older sister.
Okay. Yeah. I am an only child, but I was relating a lot to what you were just saying.
Interesting.
I was wondering if that was the thing. But no, I mean, part of it too, I think, because you're from the Midwest originally, right? Like born there?
Yeah. So I was born in Lafayette, Indiana, so I suppose so.
But you don't feel like that's really where you grew up?
No, I honestly, at this point, I do feel like the Midwest is my home. I come to LA and it's warm and it doesn't feel right. It's like I should be surrounded by negative 40 degrees.
You should be struggling more. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Because I was born in Minnesota and raised in Minneapolis.
Cool. Yeah, I went to college in Minneapolis.
Oh, that's right. Augsburg, right? Yeah. I read that. I remember that now. And I think you were there after I had already left, but it's interesting, like the connections, there's something about it too. Like that's why I was always resistant of moving to one coast or another. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe this is stretching the metaphor, but similarly in my creative process, I have trouble letting people in a little bit. And for me, I do think there's part of that Midwest, like, ethos where it's just like, nope, I can do it,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, don't give me directions, I'll figure it out.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And in a weird way, not wanting to bother people too.
Sure. But, yeah, absolutely. That's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's very interesting with all that stuff and how that affects the creative process.
Yeah, I think it is very fragile, and this is my experience with it at least, is I've been fortunate at times to have a certain balance and certain habits that did encourage like a really productive time period for me. But
like
well, for example, when I dropped out of college in Minneapolis and originally moved to Vancouver, that's when my brain really started kicking into gear. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that, well, A, this is an opportunity that exists at all for people. And then B, this, like, my life is actually going in this direction. And it's very crazy because I didn't really fully realize that there was an actual possibility for me to become a musician.
That's interesting.
Like a full-time musician. So essentially at that time, the first time I went to Vancouver, I was still doing an internship with Monstercat to fulfill like a credit at college. And so I would wake up every morning at like 6 a.m. and come into the office. And it was just, I remember how amazing it would be to be surrounded by people that were just, working on creative projects.
Right.
And it wasn't just some kind of like mundane assembly line thing. It's like people that are doing like creative problem solving. And I really liked that. And that inspired me so much. Yeah. So that, for example, really kind of got my gears turning. I remember.
Yeah. Kind of, it's like kind of taking your life off of autopilot a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I can relate to that, man. And it's interesting too, because you've always been musical, right? Like you've played music from a young age.
Yeah, definitely.
Fairly intensely, right?
Yeah, I think I always enjoyed it. So I did it a lot, but I didn't really take it all too seriously until I had reached like the latter end of my teens.
Was it just that moment of seeing the label office? Was that kind of the light bulb on?
Yeah, well, because I was at an age too where I was in my third year of college and I'm studying music business. I'm thinking to myself, what am I really going to do when I'm done with college?
Yeah, the end is in sight.
And I did feel some pressure to consider exactly what my career options are. And, I'm thinking like, that there's always the options of trying to become a professor or being a private teacher or maybe a little bit of both. Or there's plenty of other stuff too that I could have tried to do, like gigging with, I was doing a lot of jazz band gigs at the time, jazz trio gigs, like that kind of stuff is not very profitable though, for the most part.
Yeah. It's a grind, man.
Yeah.
It's crazy when I realized how it's the same with symphony orchestras. It's so competitive.
Yeah. And, I remember playing gigs with my trio and, we would split between the three of us, maybe like $200 or something. And that wouldn't cover like expenses or anything. Yeah. So, that's a big, those kind of experiences for me really cemented this idea of this is not possible. Yeah. I mean, when I went out there and really saw like their infrastructure, their team, and it was growing at the time too. And they're still growing.
Yeah, they're killing it.
Yeah, they've got an interesting model going, but yeah, just seeing that, okay, they've got enough success and they've got a system that allows this many people to do this full time. So that process of like understanding that, that also inspired me.
Of course. And was that around the same time you were also getting into electronic production?
So at that point, I had already had a little bit of experience with that. So I started producing like in 2000, late 2008, roughly 2009. And then I just started releasing albums. So like once a year I would release an album. I did it 2009 and 10, 11, 12.
Just self-releasing, right?
Exactly, yeah. And then 12 was the first time that I had an opportunity to release with a label, which I was really excited about. And I signed a contract I probably shouldn't have signed.
Of course.
Because I was too excited. Re-released an album from 11 and 12 with them. And then I started working with other labels, doing like EPs for the first time. And then in 2014, I'm pretty sure, that was my first album with Monstercat, and it also happened to be their first album as well, which was kind of cool.
Right. I remember when that came out, actually.
Cool.
Yeah, I have like a very concrete memory of that.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah, well, because I think, as you said, they were sort of on the rise at the same time.
Yeah.
And it felt like just a movement. Like it felt like something new or different was happening. How was the experience of those first couple albums? Just sort of putting it out there, I assume figuring it out as you went.
Yeah.
How was the reception? Did it get what you wanted to get out of it?
Do you mean the first few that I released ever? Or
Yeah, like the ones you self-released before you started linking up with the labels.
I mean, my expectations were so non-existent that none of that really fazed me. I remember pouring a bunch of, it's actually just all my savings into like getting CDs printed.
Yeah.
And doing like distribution through CD Baby. And just handing out CDs to people in high school and being like, this, trying to do something here.
Right.
Check it out. Hope you like it.
Yep. Check out my mixtape.
Yeah. Whenever anybody said anything about it, it was great.
What were your goals at the time? Like, was it to play shows? Was it to turn it into a career?
At that moment, it was just to make cool music. I just wanted to make something that would catch my attention if I listened to it. So that was like my priority number one. And I think that's why at that point and onward, I spent so much time learning about music production. There's a pretty significant change in like the sound from like 2009 to like every 3 years or so, maybe there's like a decent shift.
Yeah.
Like sonically.
Were you able to, because you have a long background playing the piano, right? And were you able to, when you started getting into production, to sort of attack it in the same way? Like, did you immediately try to get really deep, like learn every little facet of it?
Kind of, yeah. It was I didn't necessarily always enjoy the process of learning the ins and outs of a DAW, for example, but it all just felt like a necessary problem solving for me to get closer to my vision. I wouldn't necessarily just on a free day just sit there and read up on the FL Studio tutorials or something. Like, right. I wouldn't do that. I would just specifically look up tutorials that would accomplish things that I thought were necessary.
So did you kind of have ideas in your head of, what would eventually become this sort of like melting pot of influences and sounds? Like, you had this concept and you just needed to figure out how to execute it?
Sure, totally, yeah. That too is like kind of a never-ending process because, you just keep adding more tools to your toolbox and keep trying your best to make whatever you think is meaningful.
Yeah.
And I've found that's just constantly changed for me, the things that excite me and interest me musically. And it can be tough too, especially when you're spending almost your entire life like listening, producing, composing, thinking about music, touring music, and just like every living moment becomes that.
Yeah.
And you're often playing the same songs over and over again live, and you've already heard them a million times in the studio.
Yeah, you heard it before they came out a million times.
Yeah, exactly. So it's easy to kind of just get desensitized to that. So,
well, and this is an interesting thing, right? Because a few minutes ago we were talking about how earlier you couldn't even conceive that music, this thing you did for fun, could be a career.
Yeah.
Right. And now that it is a career, then you have to figure out how to keep it being fun. Right?
Yeah. That's your responsibility at the end of the day, to yourself as a creative, I think.
Yeah. So, we talked about you linked up with Monstercat, you were interning with them, you started releasing music with them, and stop me if you disagree, but to me that seemed like a turning point where all of a sudden like a lot more eyes were on you.
Sure, totally.
And things got a lot bigger. At that point, did you feel like it was harder to sort of keep the project going in the direction you want? All of a sudden there's more pressure, there's more eyes, probably more people pulling you in different directions.
I didn't feel that until I started touring. I think the process of making music had become so familiar to me, just me sitting in my room, my environment, doing whatever I had already been doing for years and years. But yeah, it wasn't until I stood in front of crowds that I knew had paid X amount of dollars to see me. They put time aside to see me play. And that's what kind of started putting on the pressure for me.
Did that change, either the way you thought about your own music or your writing process once you started thinking about, how it was going to sound live, how you were going to perform it,
Absolutely.
Especially in these bigger venues?
Yeah, no, it definitely has an impact. It's interesting because you don't necessarily want it to, but ultimately you can't really always control what experiences you have, and all the experiences you have are always going to influence you in one way or another.
Yeah.
So somehow, some way, I just ended up in a position where I was touring and playing a decent amount of shows, and naturally that was going to affect my music whether I liked it or not. I can't say exactly how. It's definitely possible that it veered me even more into the dance music world. I think a part of me may have even noticed that, and I think that contributed a little bit to like a 2-year hiatus that I had as well, where I just like stopped releasing music for a while.
Why did that period happen? Like at the time, did you just feel burnt out, or did you feel like you wanted to refocus?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both for sure. Just because my background with music, especially my childhood, was playing classical music, recitals and that kind of stuff. And I guess that really shaped how I see what a performance should be. And I think it's
like a
great.
certain level of excellence.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's great to have performances and shows to see that are based around entertainment and like escapism and that kind of stuff. And I think that's cool. But I found that I was veering too much into that direction, and I started losing track of the things that I needed to see in my music to respect myself.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's kind of like where the hiatus came from. And I definitely regret not releasing music. That was a mistake.
Well, but sometimes those are necessary, right? Even if you feel like it set you back, because what's the other option? You just sort of try to figure it out while everything's going crazy. I feel like that never goes well.
Sure. Yeah,
but I don't know,
it was a valuable lesson to learn, though.
Sure, and I think as artists, I guess all I'm saying is I think we do need to give ourselves license to stop every once in a while.
Totally.
Because it's so easy to feel like, I can't stop, I can't slow down, I have to be consistent. I don't know if you feel this, but to me, I feel, there's this competition that everyone's in, whether you want to be in it or not, and it's hard to sort of break out of that mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a lot of pressure for consistent output. I mean, especially nowadays when people, watch a 10-second clip of something and go on to the next 10-second clip and have already forgotten about what they watched like a minute ago, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting, like when you saw some of your early performance videos that went kind of super viral, right? And got a lot more people looking at you. Did that affect your live show or the way you thought about how you were presenting the music to people?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I knew that to some degree the music I was writing was going to be lumped into electronic dance music. But I also knew that nothing about the way that most electronic artists were performing with CDJs applied to me, and that the keyboard was always just my main tool. And so I just tried to figure out a way to build everything around that.
Well, and it looks like now, I mean, we're sitting at this sound stage, you do have the big LED wall, you have the lights, but then you still also, obviously, we're sitting next to your keyboards. And do you feel like you've sort of figured out a way at this point to balance, the big top show, the entertainment with the musicality and what you find exciting?
I'm getting there for sure. Because it's so much fun to I don't, for the lack of having a better way of putting it, just giving people what they want.
Of course.
And it's great to have a crowd enjoy themselves. It's really satisfying. And but I also, of course, want to appease my curiosities and creative interests and stuff.
Yeah.
And so, so I think I'm finding a way of keeping things fun, but also challenging too.
Yeah, and it seems like so much of your music and the way you think about your music seems to be underpinned by philosophy too, right? Or there's some conceptual parts of it.
Sure.
Correct me again if I'm wrong, but you're in the process right now of releasing like a 6 EP series.
Yeah.
And they're all sort of themed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like each one has to do with not a different emotion, but like a different concept, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, talk a little bit about that, because I love ambitious projects like that. Like I love artists taking big swings, but I'm always curious how you translate those big concepts into a piece of music. Like, what comes first? The idea, the music, how do they affect each other?
It always depends. I mean, so, for example, with my twofold part 1, part 2 albums, it was a little bit of both. I had ideas that I was writing that were just fun, and I was accruing a lot of ideas that sounded very different from each other. And at the same time, I was also really interested by this book I was reading called Tao of Physics. And I started getting really interested in this idea of opposites and duality and that kind of stuff. And I wanted to incorporate that into how the music was presented. And I hadn't really done that too much before. I'd kind of mapped out like song titles and that kind of stuff, but I hadn't really incorporated into the actual like sculpting of the music and arrangement of the music and stuff. And so it was fun to make something slightly more ambitious in that regard. And so I think that one is an easier example to use just because it's already finished.
Sure.
And Panorama is, I think, a little bit more complex in that sense because it's still happening, and a lot of the ideas are still things I'm actually like living out.
Sure.
Yeah.
and I guess I'm just interested, talking about the twofold concept, and you were saying this idea of opposites, that it was actually affecting the arrangement and the way you were putting the songs together. Would that be like a conscious thing? You're sitting in the studio, like if we're really talking about like the nitty gritty parts of it, like would you, say, I'll write it this way because this is the concept I'm excited about now? Sometimes,
yeah. So, let's say, for example, when it comes to the arrangement of the songs in the albums, I think that's an easier example to use because on Twofold Part 2, I remember specifically placing ideas in a way that would kind of create like, they'd almost be so contrasting that they would be like palette cleansers almost or something. And so then I also wanted to have that album contrast with the first one too. And also with the intros and the transitions and that kind of stuff. Those were all done with the concepts in mind to a degree.
Okay.
But obviously, ultimately, I think for me, the bottom line is still about writing music, and I'm much better versed in that process than,
of course,
discussing or expressing like philosophical ideas. It's just kind of like an interest of mine that I had fun trying to incorporate into my projects. Absolutely.
Well, and this goes back to, challenging yourself and trying new ideas and keeping it fresh.
Totally.
So the Panorama project that you're sort of in the middle of, is it more informed by sort of just what's going on in your life, things you've experienced recently that kind of give you an idea of something creative? Yeah,
I think I've had different objectives with the project, but at this point, it almost has just become a chronological representation of a portion of my life, essentially. Let's say, for example, like the first EP, Discover, there was a lot of like funk and disco influence stuff in there. And that, for example, was a very deliberate exploration of the excitement that I felt when I first kind of burst into the music scene.
Okay.
And
trying to get that vibe back.
it was interesting because I think it was a very unexpected sound from me for some people. Not only was it exciting because it was new to me, but it was also so relevant to that feeling to me of discovery. So there's kind of like, it's twofold. It's kind of relevant because it is fun music to me, but it's also fun music to me because it's new. So that's kind of what that EP was about. The Form EP was supposed to start getting a bit more, or represent, I guess, becoming more habituated with all that, and like just being a musician in the industry, learning the ins and outs and that kind of stuff, and kind of becoming used to what it takes, and
the grind, a little bit of like innocence lost.
Yeah, exactly. And so by the end of that EP, there's a song called "With You" that starts to kind of foreshadow a bit of a lot of the like darker and heavier sounds that I'm going to be doing the next two EPs that I've been working on. So those are going to be, or I'm going to try to represent a lot of the emotions and just like the psychological process of what I'd been experiencing over the last like 2 years or so.
Okay.
And so those are kind of going to represent some of the darker themes from the project. Is
that therapeutic for you? Like, is writing music, making music, is that a way you can kind of deal with struggle?
Totally, 100%. Yeah, I mean, just today I was walking back to the tour bus from the rehearsal space to grab, I don't know what I was grabbing. I think I was grabbing some equipment, but it was really hot and I was pretty uncomfortable. I kept kind of like moving my shirt around to create some airflow. And it's like, and it's often when I'm uncomfortable that I start coming up with ideas.
Interesting.
So I'm like walking around, and then all of a sudden I had this kind of this lyric that popped into mind, and this melody, busted out my iPhone, quickly recorded it, uploaded it to Google Drive, and I'll check it out maybe later tonight or something. But
it all came out of that one unpleasant moment.
Yeah. I think a lot of music comes from an unpleasant place.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. It's just interesting. I like that you're sort of openly saying, this is me putting how I felt in this moment on display. I don't know. I think that's a healthy way to deal with it. Like the artist life is stressful. There's a lot. It's weird. It's, tiring at points. And some people deal with it in less healthy ways.
Yeah. And there's no doubt that I've had my doubts, but at this point, it's tough to talk about a career that's as relevant and as amazing to me as being a musician. If I had my honeymoon phase with it, and then I had a pretty big backlash from that as well. But at this point, I'm very aware of the struggles and the sacrifices you have to make as a musician. But there's still no career I could imagine myself ever being happier doing. So, so I'm in it.
Yeah. Oh, dude, I feel you 100%. The backlash when you were having issues with it, is that what led you to kind of go back to self-releasing, go back to, I'm going to do this, my way, the way I want it to be presented?
Absolutely. Because I think I was pretty confident that having pretty much exclusively released with Monstercat for about 3 years straight was kind of affecting me creatively and subconsciously. I think I felt like I had to write music that was going to be positively received on their networks, versus just continuing to explore and challenge myself and that kind of stuff.
And at the time, you were touring with guys like Zedd, right? And
that was just absurd. It was very briefly before that. I remember going to Sioux Falls. A promoter wanted me to play a show there, and there was one person in the crowd.
Oh man.
And then not too long after that, I think that was sophomore year of college. And then after my junior year, that's when I moved to Vancouver, and the offer to do some touring with Zedd in Asia came through. It's just like, what the? So crazy.
Do you have any particular memories from those times or playing those kind of big, crazy shows?
Yeah, I think I was very unprepared for it. I really wish I had had more experience with like smaller crowds leading up to that. It's smaller but bigger than one person.
Right, yeah, to go from 1 to like 10,000. Yeah.
Right, yeah. It was I think the biggest show we played was 12,000 people.
Yeah.
In Tokyo. I think Osaka was about the same size.
How did his crowd react to what you were doing?
Yeah, it was very interesting. I ended up touring with him through other parts of Asia as well. And I had some really good experiences. I think people overall were definitely taken aback a bit. And obviously, everyone's there to see Zedd. So what I'm bringing to the table is just kind of, adding an additional piece of entertainment to the show. Yeah, I think people enjoyed it, or parts of it. And interestingly enough, I think the best show that I had was in Vietnam with him.
Okay.
I just specifically remember that the crowd really enjoyed moments where I was really kind of just going crazy on the keyboards.
Sure.
They seemed to like that.
The like super technical performance aspect.
Exactly, yeah. And especially because the entire lineup was just all DJs. And so just kind of popped in there, played the Ivories a little bit. And then,
Well, did you ever do DJ sets? Do you do DJ sets?
No.
I should probably know that.
No, that's fine. I mean, I don't know how to DJ. My manager showed me once kind of like how it works to some degree.
Yeah.
And it looks super fun. So I know at some point I'll learn, but I don't really have friends close to me or like a very pressing desire either. So I haven't really gotten into it yet, but it seems like it would be a lot of fun to learn.
Yeah, no, it's fun, man. I mean, that's all I do. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, totally.
But it's cool to think about, you on being the only live performer on a bill full of DJs, right? In some ways, I'm sure that's frustrating, but in other ways, probably then you get to stand out more than anyone else in a way, right?
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's always pros and cons, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I think I had already decided for myself that novelty is something I care a lot about. And I think it's worth trying to do something new and exploring something new. And that also backfires a lot, you know? You end up in, like we were talking about, like the lineups and stuff. And I've definitely played on lineups that I didn't feel very comfortable on.
Sure.
And I've played a lot of shows where people didn't really care to see what I was doing. But at the same time, that's going to be true no matter what you do, right? It's definitely something that is worth the cons for me, ultimately.
Yeah. Well, I guess, as we're wrapping it up, where are you with it now? Do you feel like part of any scene in particular? Do you feel like, I mean, obviously you have some contemporaries, some people, you're on tour with Koan Sound who do a cool live show that's hard to categorize.
Yeah.
But do you feel like you're part of any particular movement? Do you want to be? Where do you see yourself?
I don't know if there's something in particular that I associate myself with. I draw influence from so many different places that I don't know if I have an objective enough analysis of what I do, what my music is. I think it's still very dance floor focused, but the emphasis on the performance changes it a little bit. And there's so many other live performers out there that are incredible. Like Big Gigantic and Delito, or there's a lot of great examples. But yeah, I just have a lot of fun, kind of like trying to push my boundaries with performance and incorporating that and balancing that as best as I can with the fun aspect, I guess.
Yeah, amen, man. That's the dream right there.
Yeah.
What are some of your goals right now? It's a really broad question, but professionally, personally, what are your goals?
It's really important for me right now to understand that things happen one step at a time. So I have goals that I'm working towards. So for example, right now, that is to put on the best possible show in parallel that I can and that we can,
Yeah.
Not like it's just me doing this stuff.
Yeah. No, you got a good team here.
Yeah. So, that's kind of like a very short-term thing. I mean, beyond that, I'd love to have opportunities to, build a budget and then create an even cooler show. You know, for example, one thing that I'm really struggling right now with is incorporating my wireless guitar. There's a lot of technical issues when it comes to using wireless functionality in a live setting because people's phones like interfere with
I didn't even think about that.
with the signal. And so like last tour I started doing that and I was loving it, but it was very unpredictable. So I had to kind of scrap it for now because it wasn't worth the risk.
Right,
It would be,
right. On a big stage, big production. Yeah.
So there's like that kind of stuff that's like, you know, I want to keep building out the show and I want to make it better. And I love the idea of kind of having a more stage forward presence with the guitar. And I'm really enjoying teaching myself how to sing. And I could imagine, you know, even potentially bringing on additional members on stage with me at some point somehow.
I was going to ask about that.
I think it makes a lot of sense with my music. And if I was to like really be completely honest, I think it would also potentially even be more fun to have other musicians that I trust and that are experienced with me on stage.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that learning to share thing again, man. Which I also have trouble with, but every time you do it, I'm always thankful for it, you know?
Totally. Yeah, beyond that, I also am really looking forward to writing another album. It's funny I say that because obviously I've got a few EPs to go.
Yeah, don't
but,
you have like 4 more EPs
oh,
to
yeah.
put out?
Yeah. I guess at this point closer to 3 because the third one is almost done. But I have a lot of ideas and I've been really inspired being on tour with Koan Sound to write some new music, and so I think the next project I do after Panorama is gonna be really, really fun, and I'm looking forward to that.
Awesome, man. Well, that's the best place to be creatively, I think. I'm glad to hear you say it. I'll wrap up just with the final question that I ask at the end of each one of these episodes. Just looking for a memory, a time in your life, could be any time, when in a moment, music really meant something to you, really deeply affected you.
I had the opportunity once, and there's, I think, quite a few memories to choose from, but the first one that pops to mind is this memory of talking with a kid from the Make-A-Wish Foundation. That was just a very mind-blowing and humbling experience, you know, to think that is what they wanted to do, is to talk to me.
His wish was to talk to you. That's amazing.
Yeah, and, you know, we had a really interesting conversation. He's an artist as well, and he does a lot of drawing and painting and that kind of stuff, and he really liked to listen to my music, and he really didn't have any technical questions or anything like that, like, oh, how did you make this, or anything like that. He just kind of like, you know, just wanted to talk.
Right.
He just like chatted a bit,
just hang out,
talked about life, and I think that was a very special experience.
It's wild, man, because it's hard to process, right, that your music could really mean that much to people.
Yeah.
Like, it's what we all want as artists. We want our music to impact people, but when you really see it, I don't know, can you even like understand that consciously?
No, and it's almost when can you say that you really deserve something like that too, right? I mean, that is almost like an overwhelming like responsibility for me, because like, geez, I don't know if my music even means that much to me, you know?
Right.
It's like, I mean, it's inspiring, but it's also like, damn, you know, I don't know if I should be the one that you're calling. Isn't there someone better? Yeah. It's got to be someone better than me.
Beyonce wasn't available.
You know, yeah. But no, it's cool regardless.
No, it's amazing, man. And I think your attitude, that place of humility and gratitude, I mean, that's what'll keep you creative and winning and happy and all of that. So
for sure.
I'm glad to hear you say it. I'm glad we got to have this little time. This was fun, man.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man.
Cool. Peace.
All right, that's the show. Shout out to Haywyre. Great to see you, man. Good luck on the tour. From what I saw on that soundstage, man, I think people are in for a treat. For everybody out there listening, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did doing it. Definitely, you got to go catch Haywyre if he's coming to your city. Check out the new music. The remix package for Never Count on Me is out right now. and links to that are in the description of this episode. That's it for this week. That's it for another round of me talking loudly in an empty car. I'm going to go because I need to save my voice. I am recording a bunch more of these in the next couple days while I'm out here in LA. But wherever you're at, whatever you're up to, I hope you have a great week. I hope you take care of yourself. I hope you relax. I hope you go do something fun. Go listen to some good music. Go make some good memories. And I will talk to you next week. For Back to Back, this is Willy Joy. Have a good one. Peace.